Hi, so I wanted to just review some of the tips that I'm giving you. And the first tip, again, is the real tip, REEL, which means that there's a reel of stories that are going on in each couple's head at all times. So, one of the things, if you want to start building empathy for your partner, is you got to figure out what their story is and hear how they interpret things and what their perspective is around anything that you might not be agreeing on. So it's interesting because one of the famous couple theorists, Gottman, he's actually uh, in the Bay Area, and he's somebody that has had a lot of influence on my work. But he described that 69% of the fights between couples are not solvable. And so if we think about that, the conflict is not solvable, then that means we really have to figure out a perspective of how to actually view someone else's difference. So how are we going to have a different perspective about the conflict that we have? Different styles, um, there's no right or wrong, acceptance, accepting yourself, accepting them. But if we could look at every conflict as just a way of we're getting new information or understanding more and more why something is important to the other person, that's key. So, aside from that, there's also a story that happens in both parties' head, which develops a meaning of what's going on between the two parties, right? So, if we're going to share reality, we have to have some reality in common, but if our realities are so far apart, we really have to understand what that other person's story is. And then we have to hopefully get them to understand our part of the story. So that brings into play active listening. And one of the things that I think is such a skill to develop is to really listen. You know, people say that two ears, one mouth, we should be listening more than we're talking. So, to really try to listen to your partner and really hear what's important to them and practice doing that so that you come from a place instead of defending yourself and your position, that you're coming from a place of actively listening and relaying back to them exactly what you heard without your opinion. And then they feel heard, that you got something from that and from their story. And then from there, we tell our story, hoping that they have the same skill set that we just shared with them. And then with that, we have a softening and an easing of what was feeling like a disconnect between us. That doesn't mean there's a right, wrong, good, bad. You share my perspective, but oh, I understand where you're coming from. I have empathy about why that was so upsetting for you. And now I'm going to adjust because I know that information. I'm going to adjust in some way, shape, or form, even my mood or my mindset or my tone of voice. So that's one of the first skills to think about. Active listening and what's the story behind the feelings.